Hello everyone, I'm Sebastian Y and this is Foundations of Economics. Over the next few videos, I'm going to introduce the market structure of oligopoly and work through a few simple models of oligopolies. In doing so, we are going to introduce game theory as a framework to analyze these markets. In this video, I'm going to introduce what is an oligopoly and talk about a few examples. An oligopoly is a market structure with a small number of firms. There are more than one firm, so it's not a monopoly, but there are not enough firms to become perfectly competitive. Firms might offer identical or differentiated products. The key difference in oligopoly versus all the other kinds of market structures we've looked at is that the firms in the market recognize their interdependence with each other. In perfect competition, each firm is so small that individually they don't have an impact on each other. In monopoly, there is only one firm, and so they don't have to worry about anyone else. In oligopolies, the number of firms is small enough so that each firm is a significant part of the market and has a noticeable impact on the other firms. Firms in an oligopoly would be collectively best off if they were to behave as if a monopolist would. The monopoly outcome is the best possible outcome on the firm side. In order to maximize their profit, monopolists produce a relatively low quantity so that they can raise the price. If firms in an oligopoly were able to coordinate, they could behave together as if they were a monopoly and maximize their collective profit. The problem with this is that it's not a monopoly, it's several firms trying to work together, and each firm is really only interested in their own profit and not the profit of the group. This creates an incentive not to cooperate and to try to cheat on any agreement to personally make more profit. Ultimately, self-interest is what prevents firms in an oligopoly from cooperating. They end up getting less profit than they could have than in a monopoly. To fully understand why this is, we need to introduce game theory as a framework to study oligopolies. We'll get to game theory in just a little bit. Before we get into that, let's talk about a few examples of oligopolies. Movie studios are an oligopoly, where the top 10 firms control 90% of the market. There are still small independent firms on the fringes, but the majority of the market is controlled by the largest players. Soft drinks are also an oligopoly. The top 3 firms, which are Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and Dr. Pepper Snapple, control the vast majority of that market. In the United States, airlines are an oligopoly. After a series of mergers in the last few decades, there are now only 4 major airlines operating in the United States: United, American, Delta, and Southwest. The concentration of the airline industry does depend on the specific route we're looking at. Some routes are monopolies and some are more competitive, but the market as a whole is definitely an oligopoly. The cigarette industry has been an oligopoly for most of its history, where we've had the big 5 companies controlling the majority of the market there. Wireless telecommunications in the United States is definitely another oligopoly, which has about 4 major players controlling the majority of that market. We are going to spend most of our time thinking about duopolies, which is a specific type of oligopoly that has just 2 sellers in it. The lessons that we take from studying duopolies can be broadly applied to the more complex oligopolies with more firms, but this is going to just make the math easier for us to figure out. Some examples of duopolies would include the operating system market, where the vast majority of the market is controlled by 2 firms, Microsoft and Apple, with their Windows and Mac operating systems. Operating systems for mobile phones are also a duopoly, where there are only 2 major players, Android and iOS. And finally, microprocessors for personal computers are an example of a duopoly, where we have Intel and AMD controlling the majority of that market. That's not to say that for all 3 of these examples there aren't small firms on the fringes. There definitely are, but the majority of the market is controlled by 2 firms, making them close enough to a duopoly for our purposes. In the next video, I'm going to give a quick introduction to the field of game theory, which we're then going to apply to studying oligopolies.